Alright, so this video we're going to look at solving a system of equations, three unknowns, using Gauss-Jordan. So here's what you've got to follow when you're solving them using Gauss-Jordan. First thing you want to do is you want to write the augmented matrix, okay? And then use matrix row operations to simplify the matrix to a row equivalent matrix in reduced row echelon form, ones down the main diagonal from upper left to lower right, and zeros above and below the ones. So you want to get ones on the main diagonal and zeros everywhere else. So this is how you'll go about doing it. You'll get a 1 in the upper left corner, okay? And then use the 1 in that first column. So we're going to be in the first row, first column, and we'll get a 1 there. And use that 1 to get zeros below it. And then we're going to get a 1 in the second row, second column, and we're going to use the 1 in the second column to make the remaining entries 0 in the second column, and then get 1 in the third row, third column, and then we'll use the 1 to get zeros in the other two spots in the third column. And then you continue the process as far as possible, and then you reduce and then use the reduced row echelon form of the matrix in this step 2 to write the system solution set. All right, so let's take a look at the problem. All right, so we want to solve this using Gauss-Jordan elimination. All right, so let's go ahead and write the augmented matrix. So let's see, we've got 3, -1, 3, -2. And then we've got 1, 1, -1, and 0. And then we've got 1, 2, -3, -1. Okay, so this is your so basically it's the 3, -1, 3, and then the equal sign, that's where the line comes in, and then -2, and then 1, 1, -1, 0, that's this row, and then 1, 2, -3, -1, okay, and that's this row. All right, so in the upper left hand corner, first row, first column, we want to get a 1. We want to get a 1 right here. Okay, so one thing we could do is we could divide everything by 3, but you can see if we do that, that'll give us a fraction here, and that'll give us a fraction here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to swap row 2 and row 1. Yeah, if we wanted to, we could swap row 1 and row 3. It doesn't matter. So for right now, let's just go ahead and take row 1 and let's swap it with row 2. Okay, so that will give us 1, 1, -1, 0, and that'll give us 3, -1, 3, -2, and then 1, 2, -3, -1. Okay. All right. So we swap the rows. All right. Now what we want to do is get a 0 here, and we want to get a 0 here. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and write down what we need to do. So I'm going to do negative for row 2. I'm going to do -3 times row 1 plus row 2, and I'm going to replace row 2 with whatever I get when I add those together. Okay? Because see, if I multiply this by -3, so -3 times row 1, so 1 times -3 is -3, and then plus the row 2, which in this entry is a 3, the -3 plus 3 will give me the 0. Okay? Now, let's see what I need to do to get the 0 here. Okay? So, what I'll do is I'll do row 1 plus -1 times row 3, and I'll replace row 3. Because when I add them, I need 1 plus -1. And look, if you wanted to, you could have done -1 times row 1. And then, in other words, I could have done -1 times row 1 plus row 3 and replaced row 3. I could have done that also. Okay, it's all correct. Right? All right, so let's see what we get here. All right, so let's go ahead. All right, so notice the rows that are changing is row 2, this row, and row 3 is going to change. So row 1 is going to remain the same. So that's going to be 1, 1, -1, 0. Okay. All right, so let's do this. So I've got -3 times 1 is -3 plus 3 is 0. And then I've got -3 times 1 is -3 plus -1 is -4. And then -3 times -1 is +3. And 3 plus 3 is 6. And then I have -3 times 0 is 0, and 0 plus -2 is -2. All right, so that takes care of row 2. Now let's do row 3. So I've got 1 plus -1 times row 3. So -1 times 1 is -1, so 1 plus -1 is 0. And then I've got 1 plus -1 times 2 is -2, so 1 plus -2 is -1. And then, let's see, I've got -1 plus -1 times -3, that's 3, so -1 plus 3 is 2. And then, let's see, I have 0 and then I have 0 plus -1 times -1, that's 1, so 0 plus 1 is 1. All right, so there's the matrix after doing this. Now, what did it say? It said to get a 1 in the second row, second column. So you can see I need a 1 right here. Okay. Well, I could divide everything by -4, but that's going to leave me with fractions. So, well, look, I have a -1 here. That's easy to change. To change this to a 1, all I got to do is multiply this row by -1. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take row 2 and I'm going to swap it with row 3. All right, so let's see what we get. So I've got 1, 1, -1, 0, and then I have, now I'm going to swap these two rows. All right, so that's going to give me 0, -1, 2, 1, and then 0, -4, 6, -2. All right. And so then what I'll do is I will multiply row 2 by -1. So I'm going to have -1 times row 2, and I'm going to replace row 2. All right. So let's go to the next page. So that's going to give me all right. So let's see. So let's go ahead and just write the first 2 rows down. 1, 1, -1, 0. And then I've got 0, -4. Let's see, what was that? 6 and -2. So 6, 6 and -2. All right, so let's go back up here to this. So I'm going to multiply this. I'm going to multiply this right here by -1. So if I do that, that's going to give me 0, 1, -2, -1. That's what this will be after I multiply through by -1. Okay, and this is the line here that separates them. All right, so let's go over here to this next slide here and fill that in. So that's going to be 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, -2, and then let me go back and see, and -1. All right. So there's our new second row. And see, I have the 1 here. So what I have to do now is I have to get zeros here, and I got to get a 0 here. Okay. All right, so let's see what we can do with this. All right, so let's take care of this one. So I will do, let's see, how about row, let me write it up here by the first row. So I've got row 1 plus -1 times row 2, and I'll replace row 2. Okay, because that'll give me 1 plus -1 is 0. I'm sorry, not replace row 2. We will replace row 1. All right, and now for the third row, I'll have to do what? 4 times row 2 plus row 3 and replace row 3. All right. So let's go ahead and see what we've got. So row 1 and row 3 are being replaced. So I'm going to write down row 2. So that's 0, 1, -2, -1. Okay. All right, so let's see what we've got. Let's do this one. So I've got 1 plus, and -1 times 0 is 0. So 1 plus 0 is 1. And then I've got 1 plus -1 times 1 is -1. So 1 plus -1 is 0. And then this one I've got -1. And then a -1 times a -2 is a +2. So I've got -1 plus 2 is 1. And then I've got 0 plus, and that's going to be 1. So that's going to be 1. All right, now the third row. So that's just going to be what? 0 plus 0 is 0. And then I got 4 plus -4 is 0. And then I have, let's see, that's going to be -8 plus 6 is -2. And then I have, let's see, -4. Nope, -4 plus -2 is -6. And so there we go. All right. So now what we need is we need a 1 in this spot. Okay. And then to do that, I'm going to have to do what? I'll have to do -1/2 times row 3 and replace row 3. Okay. All right. All right, so I'm replacing row 3, so I'm going to write my other 2 rows down. All right, so if I multiply this row by -1/2, that's going to give me 0, 0, 1, and 3. All right, so now what I'll do is I'll use this one, and I need to get zeros here and here. Okay, all right. All right, so, well, on this one, I can just do what? I can do row 1 plus -1 times row 3 and replace row 1. Okay, see, that'll give me 1 plus -1 is 0, and I'll replace that with a 0. Now for this row, I'll actually have to do what? Row 2 plus 2 times row 3 and replace row 2. All right, so let's see what that's going to give us. All right, so the only row that I'm not replacing is row 3, so I'll write that row down, 0, 0, 1. There's my line, and 3. All right. All right, so let's see what we've got. We're doing row 1 and row 3. So that's going to be 1 plus, well, -1 times 0 is 0, so 1 plus 0 is 1. And then here I've got what? 0 plus 0 is 0. And then I've got 1 plus, and then that's -1, that's 0. And then I've got 1 plus -3 is -2. All right. Now let's do row 2. So that's going to be row 2 plus 2 times row 3. So, well, that's just 0 plus 0 is 0. And this is going to be what? Row 2, which is 1, and 2 times 0 is 0, so 1 plus 0 is 1, so that's working out nice. And then I've got what? -2 plus 2 times 1, so -2 plus 2 is 0. And then here I've got, let's see, -1 plus, and 2 times 3 is 6, so -1 plus 6 is 5. All right. So now you can see that I've got my 1s on the main diagonal and 0s everywhere else. So now we can come over here and write our final answer. So that's going to give me, well, this is x. So that's x equals -2. Okay. And then this is the y column, so that's y is equal to 5. And then this is your z value, your z column, so z is equal to 3. And so remember, whenever you write your solution, you want to write your solution in the form x, y, z. And so I would write my final answer as -2, 5, 3. And there's your answer. All right, so I hope the video helped. Check out my other videos. Give me a like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.